Okay, we're going 5, 4, 3, 2. Good morning. Today is, April 23rd, 10 a.m. Eastern time. I say that because this conversation is partly going to be about tariffs that the U.S. is imposing on others. And I want to make sure we get that date out there in case things change by 11 a.m. Wednesday, April 23rd. I am Jay Rosenthal. That is Jeremy Burke. You are Dennis. Is it Leader? I didn't even ask
Lighter.
that. Lighter. You are the SVP of Sales and Marketing at Ispire. We're going to talk to you about exactly why you're the right person to talk about this, but welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I'm excited to provide some insights.
Well, yeah. I hope you can, and some clarity, maybe very specifically as it affects you, your company, and the cannabis industry. But before we get there, give us a brief background on Ispire, then we'll jump into it.
Yeah, so Ispire has been around since 2010. I'd say we were very early into the vaporization hardware manufacturing space. 200 plus global patents as it pertains to vaporization. Currently, we distribute either nicotine or cannabis vaporizing products to about 70 countries globally.
That's not none.
It's not none.
That's not none. But I'll say this gently. International trade has gotten maybe somewhat more complicated over the past 60 days. Like, how does that affect you, I guess, broadly? And then we'll get more specifically around vaporization technology and manufacturing and import into the States. But start with generally.
Yeah, I'd say in general, to your point, things are changing very quickly. So during the Trump administration's liberation period, it was kind of a lively changing event by the minute. And so, yeah, we've got to lean on our regulatory and compliance, assistance, both in-house and out externally, that can help guide us through these transitions. And of course, it all rolls downhill from there to help educate our customers as to what this all means to their bottom line as they're trying to continue to stay competitive in, let's be honest, a sector that is challenging to begin with.
Yeah.
Dennis, your executive team, like the messaging from the administration is all over the place, to say the least. The tariffs are 90%, they're 125%, they're being rolled back, there's a deal coming. When you're planning, you're trying to sort of map out what you're going to do the next quarter, the next year. How difficult does this make it to operate a business that is affected by these supply chain issues?
Yeah, I mean, it makes it very volatile, right? So I think the best we can do is focus on what the current state is, make the best plans possible, and continue to look at how we either mitigate or work around, some of these changes that we anticipate forthcoming. But, it requires having that crystal ball. And I would say, fortunately for us, our executive team did a great job of, our crystal ball was clear a year ago, right? And we opened up our Malaysian manufacturing facility, which has been a big assistance to us in regards to the impact of the tariffs. So I think, yeah, there's going to be probably a lot of change forthcoming yet. But with our Malaysian manufacturing facility, I feel like it gives us a little bit of stability in regards to what some other organizations may be facing. But it also gives us a unique advantage right now.
And was that, not to dig too deep into sort of Ispire internal strategy, but was that opening up a Malaysian manufacturing facility, was that based on cost, based on reducing global risk, or all of those things, looking ahead?
Yeah, I mean, it was all the above. I think just reading the tea leaves of what occurred, in the previous Trump administration, and seeing some of the challenges that were forthcoming with China and potentially with tariffs. And so, and then just taking the risk. So, it definitely puts you out there, and it makes you shift some focus away from just your core competency of manufacturing through China. But ultimately now, again, I think it gives us a leg up versus our competitors.
And when you look, I don't mean to do like a international trade into the US 101, but let's do that a little bit as it pertains to cannabis. So let's say either manufacturing in China or Malaysia both have tariffs affecting them right now, some more than others. And it comes to port of entry, right? The materials, the hardware that you're talking about come to a port of entry. Someone pays the tariff And then what? Or how does that get paid? And then what, I guess, is the question.
Yeah. So typically that product will get to the port, and CBP will review the intake form, the CBP entry form. Within that form, it's going to have an HTS code. So, fortunately, unfortunately, cannabis vaporization shares the same HTS code as e-cigarettes do. So, within that form, it's going to say where this country of origin product originated from. They're going to look at the HTS code and they just apply whatever that tariff rate is. So historically speaking, pre-January, the e-cig HTS code for vaporizers coming into the US was 25% plus 2.6% duties. And then of course we all have, had a first-hand experience over the last 60 days as to where that has gone. So today, we are facing 145% tariff. With threats of that increasing to 245%. So at port is when that will be kind of drawn together based on country of origin and the HTS code. And then, how Ispire does it, which might be different than others, is, we itemize for our customers. So that cost is a cost of doing business that we do pass along to our customers. But we do wait just to verify to make sure that, everything aligns with what we anticipated. And then we try to true up their invoices accordingly.
And then let's follow the supply chain, because I think it's important to understand sort of where and how it hits even end consumers, right? So you've imported it, then what?
Yeah. So, and I think a great example is actually just looking at a individual case, right? So if we had a customer who was accustomed to getting a vaporizer into country for $3, right? And that's after duties and tariffs and everything has been paid. That same product today, based on 145% tariffs, would cost them about $5.70. So you think about that cost, right? And if you look at it from a margin perspective, now you got to follow the value all the way through to the end consumer. So now you've got a filling partner who's accustomed to hitting a certain margin profile. They're going to pass along those additional costs. Then that's going to go to a distributor, a wholesaler, or a B2B store who's going to put their margin on top of it. And eventually all that does is it gets passed along to the point where it's going to have to be absorbed by the consumer, right? And I think we've had very specific customer conversations where, they've asked for us, to share in those costs. And we encourage them to pass those increases along just like we have to, right? Because at the end of the day, the consumer is going to tell us what their bandwidth is for what these cost increases really mean to them. But it is a cost to do business for everybody.
Not to continue with the macro 101, but on your consumers, like how elastic is the demand for vaporizers? Like, is there a point where sales just kind of fall off, or do you see people, still paying even as it gets more expensive, even, 100%, 200%?
Yeah, I would say that the reputable brands, right? The brands that have built a strong following and they have a strong reputation for quality, those brands are the ones that can probably absorb the increase because their consumer base trust it, right? But if you think of what cannabis looks like today, specifically in the US, you've got a very mature market on the West Coast. You have a growing emerging market on the East Coast. And so what we do find with some of our customer conversations is, there are customers that are migrating towards less expensive options, right? So skirting around things like quality and integrity, just so they can still capture that low cost. And by doing so, they are putting consumers at risk, because not saying that there's anything entirely wrong with those products, but there's a reason why they're less expensive, right? So I would say that the customers that we've really aligned ourselves with are the ones that care about quality. And they're looking at this and saying, okay, like, yes, it's not ideal. But at the end of the day, we're not going to take shortcuts, because our consumers' experience and their view of our brand is so important.
Yeah. Jeremy is the B school guy, so I'll ask this question. One thing I learned in my one semester of business school is that business is like foreseeability, which I think may be a made up word, but like as you look ahead, and some of it is like you've mitigated some risk in the past by varying where manufacturing is done. But as you look ahead, like how do you plan for unknown, and not even like, let's go Donald Rumsfeld, unknown unknowns of things that may happen, which you can't even plan for over the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months. That's like on the import, import component, manufacturing import part, but also around market fluctuations, which, we're going to learn about price elasticity with customers. We're going to learn about new market size and scope and, ramping up. We're going to learn how old markets are sort of dealing with the latest sort of economic news. Like, how do you like, do you have a huge whiteboard where you plan all this, Dennis? Or is it like, how do you think about those strategies as you move in through 2025?
Yeah, I think, over the last 60 days, the term reshoring has come up, right? Which basically, for anyone who doesn't know, it's, hey, shifting manufacturing back to the US and what that value chain looks like. So I would say, like, listen, our eyes are wide open, and I think they have to be. The things we can control today there are certain platforms, even within the vaporization sector that we play with, that are subjected to different varying amounts of tariffs, right? So for instance, when you consider carts or pods, those are actually identified by HTS codes as parts or pieces. So those incorporate a different tariff code than others. So, what I do encourage a lot of our customers is, if they're not looking at getting into a cart or a pod-based system, this is a good time to actually look at that as an option, because they do operate under different rules when you're looking at HTS tariff codes. So that's been one direction we've gone. Is now, if you think about even broader whiteboarding, is like, okay, from a product innovation standpoint, like what pathway do we go to help drive? And we all know the value of pods versus disposables, right? There's a lot of discussions around banning of disposables already in Parliament in the UK. We've seen a big push on this. We hear a lot of rumblings going on with California, in other states as well. So, we look at pod-based platforms as maybe a near-term solution to help a lot of these brands transition over. But yeah, I mean, it's a very broad conversation. To your point, Jay, is like, it's not just a single whiteboard session of like supply chain, right? Then you have to incorporate product, and again, everything has to play down to what's the value to the end consumer. So we think we're well positioned when it comes to all these facets, but it's not an easy equation to solve for.
To get a little more granular, Dennis, and you may not have the numbers off the top of your head, but like, for our viewers, how much of your cost of goods sold is outside of the US? And is that sort of similar, to the rest of the industry, to your competitors? And I guess I sort of asked that question to make the point, like, how realistic is reshoring, for the vape part industry?
So I've heard of others that are exploring it today. I don't know really what that means. We are a founding member of Vape Safer. So Vape Safer is an organization that was put together basically between Ispire and like-minded vaporization companies, really looking out for the safety of the consumer, right? And so we all kind of discuss and strategize around, like, how do we best position our industry to be successful, but also, provide consumer safety. I think based on labor costs today, like, it's going to be a challenging conversation to have. Do I think that the global supply chain is going to completely change through this process? Absolutely, right? So even as we talk about, our facility in Malaysia, that supply chain is not mature, right? So we are working with suppliers that are still leaning on Chinese expertise or Chinese sourcing to create this bridge in which they become the experts. So there is, I think, going to be a shift as we look at the global supply chain where, a Chinese manufacturer in the past may now set up satellite manufacturing facilities in near countries so that they can continue to supply those components, but in that country of origin, right? So I think that's where we're going to see a pretty big shift here, is instead of large macro facilities in China, you're going to have many micro facilities across different countries that help other manufacturers achieve, their ultimate goal.
You think it's like a real global industry now?
It has to be. Yeah.
I know it's just I do have a sense, and this goes back to sort of reality on the ground, even in sort of, the US Capitol, of how they look at the industry and what they think about the cannabis industry versus what it really is, right? Like, if they even saw this conversation, random congressman who's considering rescheduling or, banking reform, they may be thinking about the cannabis industry in their, home state,
right?
Really not even realizing that it is a global industry with global supply chains, not so much the flower itself, but the rest of the industry is really a global industry, just like nearly every other industry. So we're going to cut this up and send it to every member of Congress, if that's okay with
you. Absolutely.
They should. I mean, but it is interesting to think about, like we think about, you walk into a dispensary here, you buy a, buy a vape pen, like deconstructing that about where the parts and pieces and inputs come from around the world. You tell me, it could be from 4 or 5 different countries, and then it gets to the part where the cartridge gets filled in, outside of
I think that the U.S. is going to have to get really diligent about how they define the transformation of product, right? And I think in the past, if 80% of the materials were sourced from a single country, it was just defined like that's the country of origin for that product. But now, as we think about this transformation of products, to your point, you could be sourcing multiple pieces from multiple countries, but if the true transformation of what that is happens in that core competency country, which could be the US, like, what does that mean? And by definition, like, what skill level of the tradesman has to be incorporated to actually get that finished product? So I think it's going to open up a much broader conversation that really reshoring is just starting to scratch the surface on. But, companies like us, we need to figure that out quickly to stay ahead, because there could be a distinct advantage to it.
Yeah. I'm glad we have this conversation. It's funny, Dennis, and Jeremy was there, but during MJ Biz, like, we're having all these conversations, we were recording many of them. And, I think it was the end of one of the days, so things were getting spicy. But we were like, oh, we're sitting in November or late November, early December 2024. There was just an election. If there's and this is specific about China, if there's tariffs on China, what does that mean specifically for the cannabis industry, whether it be lights or vape input, like any of those things? Not to say that I'm an idiot, but like, that just dawned on us, like, oh my goodness, some of the really key components of the industry are about to get 100% more expensive.
It is. Yeah. And they call it the picks and shovels, right? It's the foregone pieces that you put a lot of thought into. Everyone thinks of the flower or the oil that you consume, and that's the cannabis industry. And it is a big part of it. But, I like to think of the vaporizer is the suit of the oil, right? So, we're the one helping deliver it. We're the sexy uniform that, you put over it. So, like, it is important, and you don't think about it until, these conversations arise.
Yeah. Would it be okay if we nominate you as the next Secretary of Commerce after Howard Lutnick gets run out of office? Is that okay?
I think this is the beginning and the end of my political circuit, guys.
You'd be very good at it. You're a very good description of sort of how global supply chains work, but also the impact, short and long term, of how supply chains may be shifting, even in this one specific slice of the economy and of trade, but multiply that by really every sector.
Right.
Much bigger, I would imagine, automobiles, much bigger, about how impacts of tariffs imposed by one country can have massive impacts across the rest of the economy.
It does, and it's interesting because I think that either brand or consumer bandwidth differs based on the product source too, right? So we have a joint venture with a company called Ike Technology, which, we're producing age gating BLE chips that we can add into either our nicotine or our cannabis devices. That connects through a blockchain technology to your smartphone and then uses a clear database for facial recognition. So if you think about, the vaporization specifically on the nicotine side, age gating has been a huge challenge for us in the US. And when the vape crisis hit in 2018, that was kind of the emergence and proliferation of the illicit nicotine space. And so with that being said, the FDA has tried to stop the importation of these products at port, which has been unsuccessful. They've done raids at individual, B2B shops. That has been, smallly impactful, but again, you can't do it at scale when you're talking about the tens of thousands of vape stores that are in the United States. So we took it one step further, and how do you actually limit the use of those products at the point of use, right? So with Ike Technology, you make that handshake agreement between the smartphone device, which is connected to an individual consumer, and then that will allow the device to either function or not function, right? And then you can create as much friction as you want. So every time, if I want to make sure that, my child is not, vaping in the background, I can set it up where every single time it has to recognize my face for me to use it. Or you can set it up the first time, it'll scan, and then it'll unlock that device for the lifetime of the device. But components like that, I think there's an appetite because they see the impact of what that can mean in regards to PMTA, right? And the very limited amount of brands that have actually achieved that certification or approval. And so I look at the bandwidth and I'm like, 145% tariff on a BLE chip that provides consumer safety into a very challenging environment to get into. I feel like that is something that the consumers will absorb, the brands will absorb without even questioning. But to your point earlier, hey, I don't want to pay more for this box, that my vaporizer comes into. So this corrugate box that cost me 2 cents is going to cost me 3.5 cents now. And that's the challenge, right? But there's going to be certain elements that I think, our customers and end consumers are willing to pay a little bit more for.
Yeah. Well, Dennis, I appreciate your time this morning and hope we can connect again as chaos unfolds, not because of you. What?
I was just going to say, things may change again. We may be in a break.
I hope I'm your first phone call when we get the next increase.
Right. Sure. Well, or decrease, maybe. That would be more fun.
Yeah.
Well, it's now 10:21 on Wednesday, April 23rd. So everything we said in these 21 minutes will hold, at least for now, on Wednesday, April 23rd. Dennis, thanks so much for joining us here today, an enlightening conversation. So thanks so much.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Dennis.